All right, I guess we'll start up. So we're going to wind up actually starting off where we ended off last week. So we're not going to create new folders, just use the same lesson for lesson that we've been using up to this point. We're not going to modify anything. But today, last week, we finished by creating a user and, sorry, we didn't create the user. We actually filled out the form and submitted it to the next page. And then we were able to see the details of that user, but we didn't actually wind up creating the user and adding it to the database yet. That's obviously today's job. We're going to do that today. So hopefully everything goes according to plan. It should, but we can take it nice and slow. Don't worry. We don't need to rush. We'll see where we get. So let's start off by opening up WAMP so that we have our tools open. We'll open up WAMP, make sure it's running on our computers. And once you have the little green icon down at the bottom, just go ahead and click on that little green icon. Click on the www directory. Navigate into Comp 1006. And click on your lesson 4 folder so that it's open. Sorry, actually, you want to pull that into Visual Code. So if you open up Visual Code or whatever ID you're using, then you can just grab the lesson 4 folder, pull it right into the window, and let go. And it will open up like so. And now it's open. The benefits of doing it from the www folder that comes up inside WAMP is then you're guaranteed to be in the correct folder. Because if you don't do it that way and you try to load it up from the past projects you've been working on, you might wind up in the incorrect folder. So we want to make sure we're in the correct folder. So let's just verify everything is still working as where we ended last week. If we open up our browsers, we can navigate to our local host, comp-1006, hit enter, click on our lesson 4 lesson, and you should see your home page. All these links should be working. The My House, About Me, and Contact Me. Your profile should not be working only because we don't have the ID hooked up yet by the looks of it. You should be able to view all the users though. And you should be able to click on a user and see the user's picture and their details. That's where we ended last week. So there's all our user pictures, right? I think we also finished off with the login form. Yeah, we've got the login form. The register just points to the same form. They're both, register points to a new user. And we've got a logout button that does nothing. So if we go to create a new user or click on register, you can fill out these details. Enter in an email address and it'll generate a little picture for you. Type in a password. And I think all it does right now is actually spit out the details from that form. And that's where we ended last week. Cool. So this week, we're going to talk about a few different concepts. We will build the create script, so we will have the ability to create a new user and insert it into the database. That's our goal. Let's go to the lesson plan for this week, which is the same lesson plan we've been going to each week. Any day now, Mac. There it goes. So I'm just going to navigate to the same lesson plan we've been using. You can get there from lesson 4 in Blackboard if you need to. We did partials already. And last week we did index and show. And we talked about superglobals. So the superglobals, just to recap, superglobals are the get and post methods. The cool thing about superglobals is they allow us to be able to transfer information from request to request. Get and post will last for one complete request cycle, which means when we transmit them, they'll be available on the next page. After that point, they disappear, they get destroyed, and any data that was stored in them is gone, right? So they only last for one complete request cycle. The session variable, however, lasts for as long as you have a session or unless you clear it yourself. That session variable will last the whole life cycle of your application. Once you close your browser, it dies, and all the data that was inside of it disappears, and it doesn't persist after that point, which is what we looked at last week. We talked about role-based authentication, which is what we're going to be implementing. Role-based authentication basically means that we have multiple user levels, right? So we have a general user, who's the user that comes to your website, doesn't log in, can view your about page, can view your contact page, view your home page, any public accessible space. The logged in, the authorized user, they're a little different. They can actually log in, they can create a profile, they can edit their profile, and at some point they'll be able to add comments to your content that you have on your site. The benefits of using a logged in user versus a non-logged in user is you can kind of vet who they are. And you can use that to your advantage so that they're not, spamming your site and it's not some bot just filling out a comment form. And then the admin user, well, that's you, right? You're the administrative user. You're the kind of the God mode user. You have full access across the whole website. You can do whatever you need to do for your site, right? So that's the three different levels that we have. Public user, you don't have to do anything for that. However, the other two user accounts will have to monitor their roles and keep track of what their role is. So those are pieces that we're going to have to pay attention to. So we looked at that last week as well. Then we got to registering a new user. We talked about the form. We created a form. And I gave you a chunk of SQL for you guys to enter in. I think we should actually talk a little bit about this SQL. I wasn't going to, but I feel like pieces of it are kind of necessary to know, so I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it. All right. You guys are doing SQL in your other class, obviously. You've learned to create a table, right? You know what a table is. I'm sure you understand what's happening here with the ID int not null auto increment. Basically, that creates a field that auto increments. Every time you create a new record, it creates a new it increments that identification by 1, and it just keeps going like that. The next one is a variable character data set. So first name can store up to 20 characters. That's what that 20 means. Last name, same thing, just a string, store up to 20 characters. The not null is super important. That basically says this field is required. You can't insert a record without populating data inside that record. If it said null, then you could, right? Email, same thing. Avatar can be null. You don't have to have an avatar. However, we're auto-generating an avatar, so it's irrelevant anyways. And then the role. So this might be something you haven't seen yet in your MySQL class, and that's the enum data type. How many of you are familiar with the enum data type? A few of you? So the enum data type, basically the way it works, you can think of it like an array. It's an array of values that you're allowed to select, right? And basically what it means is only the values that are defined by the enum are allowed to be inserted into that record. So if you're trying to insert something that isn't admin or general, it'll reject it, and the record won't be allowed to be added to MySQL. It has to be one of these two values. So our roles right now that we have set are admin and general. And by default, so you see it says not null, which means it has to have a value. By default, the default role is general. So every user that gets created, you don't have to set the role. MySQL will take care of that automatically and immediately set the role as general. Because you have access to the database, the administrator account, what you'll do is create a brand new user for yourself, open up phpMyAdmin, and go modify the role and set yourself as the administrator. That's the easiest way to do that. Then we have our password field, just a variable character that stores up to 255 characters. That's on purpose because we're storing a hash, and hashes can be quite large. So we want to make sure we have enough information to store the whole hash. And then created at is a timestamp that I create automatically for you. You don't even have to manage that. Basically what happens is when you add a new record, it will automatically add a date stamp for you in the created at field. Anytime you update that record, it will update the date stamp under the updated at for you. These are really handy. You'll see these in model view controller systems. They do that automatically for you, and they're super beneficial for keeping track of when things were created or last updated. And then the engine is just my SAM. There's other ones like NODB and stuff. We're just using the default one. And then this block, just a big insert block that inserts all the users, a bunch of default users. Now, if you look at this, this password isn't going to make any sense to you, mostly because it's a string that has been converted into a hash. And that hash actually translates out to the word text. So the default password for all users that I've inserted into the database is test. That's just the default password. It's not a good idea to create a default password. That's not a thing. But we're doing it just for argument's sake right now. I will show you hopefully before the end of class, like before the end of the course, how to eliminate that and actually create something else, like a generated hash or something. All right, any questions about the SQL? No? Does that basically seem familiar? Like you guys have done this in the other class, like in your SQL class? You've created a table, right? Cool. So most of that should seem familiar. You've worked with varchar, I'm sure, right? You've worked with auto-incrementing. Good. Anybody not worked with auto-incrementing? Okay, awesome. Cool. So there's some things that you might be able to pick up. You could always grab these things and really surprise your SQL teacher when you're auto-creating created at dates and updated at. That would definitely impress them. All right, let's scroll on. So after that, we added in our form.php page. And we didn't do a heck of a lot with the form. You know what? I'll open up the code because the code makes more sense. I'm going to hit Control P. I'm going to go to Users, Form, and pull up the form. So here's our form. The only things we really did in this is we added a method. We set the method to post. By default, what's the method of a form by default? Is it post or get? How many people say it's post? No? How many people say it's get? Cool, you're right, get. So by default, the method is get. What would happen then is the attributes that we have inside our inputs, they would all get shoved into the query parameter string, and that would be sent off as part of the URL to the next point. We use post because it's kind of security by obscurity, which basically means because a person can't see it over your shoulder, hopefully you're kind of a little bit more secure. But in reality, it's just placebo. You're not actually getting any security out of it. And then the last piece we added was action. Action is where we're sending this data, right? So when we post the data, the action is where the data is going to go. It's a URL, and at the end of the URL, hopefully there's a script that will take our data, parse through it, and add it to the database or do whatever it's going to do, log us in or whatever the action's going to be. So it's always our action. The action is wherever we're going to actually deal with this data. Then we added in, well, we didn't really add anything else. The only pieces we did add was this name attribute. The name attribute is absolutely crucial. You can't forget the name attribute, because if you do, what will happen when you submit this form, there'll be no data at the other end for you. What PHP does is it takes this name attribute and it takes the key that you created, it adds it to the post superglobal as a key, and then it takes the value of your input and it stores it in as a value, which we looked at last week by creating post requests and get requests. So it's super important that you have the name field. That makes things a lot easier for you. We did that for email, password confirmation. We didn't talk much about what password and password confirmation are supposed to be doing. Basically, the idea is when a user types in a password, because the password is invisible to them, right? Like when you type in your password in the form, blah, 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 you can see it's just dots, right? They can't see what they're typing. So what can often happen is a user will type in a password and they might make a mistake. They might type in the wrong character or something along those lines. And if they do that, by using the password confirmation, you can kind of catch it, right? Otherwise, the alternative, there's really only one alternative. If they type in the wrong password, they would have to reset their password, right? That's the alternative to that, which, you know, sometimes some sites do that automatically. When you guys registered for Slack, you probably noticed it only had one password field. It didn't have a password confirmation field, because their whole concept is you can just reset the password if you typed it in wrong, right? I don't know how I feel about which way to go. I kind of like this way because then it's one and done. I don't have to worry about it. But I think reset password is still important too. You do need some way for a user to change their password. All right. That basically catches us up to what we've done so far. Right, and we did the form as a partial. So that takes us into today's class, which we're going to talk about things like variable scope, and we're going to talk a bit about using the session variable to our advantage for flash data and form data, which we'll talk about as well. But before we do that, let me pull open the actual notes for it. There we go. Cool. Just before we continue, is there any questions about what we've learned over the last few weeks about superglobals or posts, get, anything like that, connecting to MySQL? No? Okay. We'll keep moving along then. So, variable scope. You guys have already learned about variable scope in your programming classes, and this still applies to PHP, but we're going to talk about it in a bit of a different way. When you're doing variable scope, right, variable scope, the idea is variable scope is the visibility of a variable. It's whether or not the rest of the application can see that variable. So in Java, when you guys define a variable in Java, you define it in that class, right? And only things that are contained in that class can actually see that variable in that scope. Anything outside of that class can't see the variable unless there was some way to define it globally, right? PHP is a little bit different. PHP does not have block scoping, where many other languages do. And what block scoping basically looks like, just to give you an idea, block scoping looks a little bit like, let me just make sure we have the right thing. Block scoping looks like this. I have a set of parentheses, right? I define a variable in here. And then if I try to access the variable outside of there, I should get a reference error because the variable has been defined inside a block. Those curly braces are blocks. And you guys see those curly braces all the time, right? You see them when people put them in if conditions, right? You see blocks that way. You'll see blocks in a while loop, right? You see blocks in the for each loop that we've been working with as well. You see blocks in a lot of different places. And what's interesting is you can actually just type a block like that as well in most programming languages, just a raw block. The thing is in C, Java, JavaScript, so many other languages, that block would mean that this variable is scoped within this section. However, in PHP, it's not. And what would happen in this scenario is that would actually produce the variable, and we would see 5. We'd see the value of 5. It's not actually scoped, right? Which makes it a little bit more globally scoped, and you need to be aware of that those things kind of happen. If you wanted to scope that variable so it was stuck in there, you would have to wrap it in a function. That's really the only way around it. Only variables defined inside a function are scoped and not available outside of the function. Same thing with a class. If you define them as a method or a property, then they're scoped to the class. But variables just in the main page, always available to you. So you have to be careful about variable threading, which is where you overstep your values, you overwrite your values inside your variables. So you got to be careful about that. The reason why I bring this up is because I've kind of realized that it might seem a little confusing when we do these kind of things. Remember that wonderful connect script we wrote way back? Right? Whoops. So we have our connect script. And inside our connect script, if we look, you'll see we have all these variables. We have host and DB name, username, password. We have connection, right? Notice that none of this is inside a function. It's all just sitting here at the global level. And include, when we include, it copies these content, entirely this content, and pastes it wherever we decide to include it. So here's where the problem occurs. If I turn around and say, okay, well, I'm going to make my password equal to the password the user provided, now I've got an issue. I have overwritten the password that's in the connect PHP page because those contents from the connect.php page have been pasted into the page. It's literally as if we did this. That is literally what we've just done. We've copied those details and pasted them directly into the page. So now you can see where the problem is. I have a password up here, which the connection requires to be blank, and I'm now overwriting the password down here, saying, nope, the password is now this thing. That becomes an issue, right? Because of variable scoping in PHP, we have to be careful about this because the only way we can scope our variables is by wrapping them in a function. We have to make sure they're in a function so that we don't wind up with these variables bleeding outside of our function and then we accidentally overwrite them. So there's a way around that. We can actually wrap this whole thing in a function, the connect script in a function, call the function when we include it, and then we don't have to worry about accidentally doing variable threading. We don't have to worry about overwriting the password or username or any of that other information, or the con variable or anything like that, because we'll just define it in the next file when we call the function. So why don't we do that now? We'll actually correct our connect.php script so that it works properly. So right now our connect.php script is a very large file, right? We're going to wrap it in a function. So let's just go to the very top of the file, and we're going to type in the word function, and we're going to give our function a name. I think connect works for me. If it works for you, there we go. We have function connect. Now, obviously, I want to make sure that this whole script is contained within the function block, right? So I have an opening curly brace here, and I have a closing curly brace here. So I'm going to delete the closing curly brace, scroll to the very bottom of my file, hit enter, and add it at the bottom. And I'll even just write a little bit of text here saying closing function. So I know that that's the brace that I'm using to close the function. So now, obviously, I need to go through my system and change some of the ways I've done something, right? Because we access this constantly, and everything is going to be broken now. So if we go to our browser, right? Is anybody still typing that out? I'll go back up to the top. You're just typing this. And everything else gets contained in here. It's all shrunk up in here. Just the opener and the closer. That's it. So now if we go to our browser and we go take a look at the local host, you're going to notice that things are broken, right? Because the issue we're going to have, if I come here and I go to users, view all users, is I no longer have this variable called con. And the reason is because con is no longer scoped to the whole main file, right? Con is now sitting inside of a function. So I don't have access to it because functions scope our variables within themselves. So if I want access to con, I'm going to have to re-instantiate it. I'm going to have to redefine it and assign it a value. So we'll just basically create it and assign it the connect function, the return value of the connect function. Let's jump back here because we do need to return that. At the very bottom, just above our close, we're going to return $con, and that will return the connection for us. So now when we call our function, it's going to return this value back to us, and now we can store that value inside a variable and then use that variable within our scripts. However, we still haven't fixed anything yet. Everything's still broken. If we were to jump back to our browser and take a look, you're going to see that it's still broken. See, if I hit Control-R, still broken. And that's because this variable is not accessible outside of the function. I know I keep repeating myself, but I feel it's necessary. That variable is not accessible outside of the function. So we need to make it so it is. First, let's go fix the user's index page. I'm going to hit Control-P, user index, so I jump to that file. Or you can use your little sidebar and go to usersindex.php. I'm going to scroll to the top here. Here's where I've included my includes connect.php page, right? Underneath there, I'm going to create a new variable called con, and I'm going to make it equal to that connect function that we created, and then save it. So I'm calling the function. That function is going to return our connection to us, and I'm going to store that in a brand new variable called con. That's under users/index. So once you've done that, go ahead, jump back to your browser, hit Control-R, and yay, we've got users again. Our users are back. Click on one of the users. I'm going to click on Donnie Man. Oh, everything's broken, right? Same issue, undefined variable con, right, because it's not defined. So I'm going to jump back here. I'm going to go to users, show this time. And I'm including the connect script already. So I'm going to go underneath the connect script. I'm going to type $con equals the connect function we wrote and end it with a semicolon. So that is that line there. On users show.php. So that's going to return the connect script, and we're going to store it in that con variable, and now that should be available to us. So if we jump back to our browsers, hit Control-R, there's Donnie and his derpy face. We're good. Got everything we need. Now, I don't think we've added the connection script anywhere else. Does anybody remember anywhere else we might have put it? I'm pretty sure we've only done index and show. I mean, we'll come across it the second we hit a page that we didn't add it, right? It'll blow up and remind us that we forgot it. So we're probably good. So that way we've encapsulated that variable, which means, and this is super important because we're about to create our action scripts to deal with all the user's details and put them in the database. And I guarantee you we're going to title a variable called password, which will cause a conflict with this file. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure we're encapsulating our variables so that we don't have that issue, right? especially with common scripts that we're passing from page to page. We want to make sure we encapsulate those variables. So that's cool. So we have our variable scope. We fix that. Our next step, this is all like the pre-steps that we need to do before we actually go ahead and write the create script. We want to make sure all these little pre-steps are done. And we have a couple of utilities that we want to build. We want to build a way to communicate with our user, right? Because our user is not going to go and read our code, and we wouldn't want them to, right? That's a security issue. We want to be able to tell the user, hey, you made a mistake, you messed up, or, hey, what you did was awesome, right? Some way to communicate back and forth with them. But we have an issue. Get and post work through one request, right? We can use those Superglobals for one complete request. So user submits the form, that's the one request. Now that's all empty. And I want to navigate back to a different page and give them some information. The problem is I don't have get or post available to me anymore because all the data is destroyed. So how do I get them that information? Well, I use sessions. Sessions are great because sessions, I can persist my data for as long as I need it to persist, and it's nice and conveniently in a little Superglobal. And when I want to remove it, I'll just remove the data when I'm done with it, right? Super easy. Because sessions are so common and they're going to be included everywhere, and every single page should have access to the Flash messages, we're going to add Flash messaging to our header so that it's available absolutely everywhere. And then in addition, we also need to deal with how we're going to store it and clear it, because obviously once they've seen it, they don't need to see it again, right? We don't want to leave it there. We don't want to keep adding to it. Otherwise, they'll have, this many messages sitting in the top of their screen. We want to make sure we clear them out when we're done with them. So let's build the Flash notifier. Let's open our header file because we'll put the logic in the top of the header file. So there's our header.php. And you should already have a step 1, step 2, step 3 inside there. So the first thing that we should do is actually include our common config file. It doesn't look like it's actually been included in there. So we will include it. So I'm going to say include once. I'm going to use that handy tool dir name __ like so, which will access the directory we're in. And then I'm going to give it /_ config.php. Now I'm including my config file. The config file will give us access to the root normalized path that we created before and the base path that we created before, so that all of our paths are nicely absolute and not relative. Once you've typed that out, go ahead and open up your browser. Click refresh to make sure we don't have any errors. If you have an error, make sure that you type this exactly the way I did. And that's a dot, not a comma. After that, we're ready to start the session. Does anybody remember the function that's built into PHP to resume or start a session? What it was called from last week? Not a chance, huh? All right, yeah, I'll give you a hint. We're going to write an if condition. And after the if the if condition is true, we're going to call that function, which is called session start. Super easy to remember. How do I start a session? Session start. However, we have to be careful because if the session is already started, if it's already running, and we attempt to call session start, it will actually come back with an error telling us the headers have already been sent, which is a super obscure error that's very difficult to figure out what went wrong, right? So what we have to do is basically just say, I want to check if the session is already running, And if it is, then I'll do nothing. But if it isn't, I want to start it, right? So how do we check if the session is running? Actually, we want to check if it's not running. That makes more sense. We're going to check the session status, which will let us know what's currently going on. And we're going to look for the value constant PHP session none, which is a constant that PHP creates that basically is the exact value that you want to find in session status. So that will start the session if it's not already running. Otherwise, if it's running, cool. We can just do whatever we want to do. We have to make sure it's running before we can access session variables. A common mistake that new PHP programmers make is they will try to add values to session variables before they start the session, or they'll try to access session variables before they started the session. Make sure you've done this step, this complete step here, before you write variables or read variables from the session. Next, we're ready to do step 2, which is assign the session variables. So let's do that. So we're going to assign the session variable which we'll call flash, to this flash data variable. Otherwise, we'll assign null. Remember, that's that shorthand if-else statement, or it's a shorthand ternary statement that basically says, is session flash set? Yes or no? If it's no, assign it null. Is it set and contain a value? Is there actual value sitting in there? No, then assign it null. If both those answers are yes, then take the value in here and now assign it off to this variable. The last step is to unset the session. So what we've done is we've taken any of the flash information that's sitting inside this flash variable and we've assigned it off to a variable that we can now use in our page. Our last step is to actually unset this variable so that we clear any of the messages that are currently in there, because we don't want them to persist from page to page to page. Otherwise, we'll wind up with a big block of messages, right? We want to make sure we clear them each time. So that's our next step. We do unset, which unsets the value. And we pass it the underscore session flash. Somebody has no muffler or cutouts. All right, so walking through again, we check to see if the session is running. If it isn't, we start the session. That's step 1. Step 2, we take any values that are currently in session, like in the session flash, and we assign it to a new variable. So we just move them over, right? Then we unset that session flash. So that way, all of our values in the flash thing are now gone. We clear them out. So the structure for our session flash messages, what this thing's actually going to look like, I'll show you. I wrote it out inside the lesson plan builder so you can actually see it. Looks like this. So here's our key, right? Flash. This is our session. So it's got a new variable called flash, right? And it is equal to a hash, right? The hash has 2 keys. One key is called success. And then the other one, which ironically is an error because I didn't type it correctly, should be danger. but it says error. The other one is error. This thing can actually contain multiple flash types. So you can use success, info, warning, as many as you want. Doesn't matter. Or you can just make them up. Totally doesn't irrelevant. Each one of these will store an array. And inside the array will be the messages. So we have a hash, and in the hash, we have two arrays, basically, right? Or more, or multiple arrays, depending on what we're doing. So obviously, we need to be able to parse this, get our messages out, and present them to the user, right? So another one of those good times for a partial. Makes perfect sense to have a partial. So we're going to jump back to our browsers here, or to our editor, I mean. And you'll notice under partials, I've already created the flash.php for you. Go ahead and open that. In here, we'll create our flash notification system, which will output our flash messages. And when it does, they'll look like this. Like that. It's basically how they'll look. Nice and clean. Can't take credit for it. It's all Bootstrap. Bootstrap does all the work. So below is our flash notification system. It will iterate over the flash data and output the messages. So step one, check if the variable flash data is set and has data in it. So we don't automatically assume we have variables. We check for them first. Make sure they exist before we try to use them, right? So we'll go if, and we can actually check whether it's empty and set all at the same time by just using the empty check that PHP provides us. $flash data. And we'll create the parentheses. After we write this, we'll take a break. So now this closing curly brace is up a little high. We actually want to wrap it down here towards the bottom. So I'm going to take that closing curly brace off. I'm going to click down here. And I'm going to add the closing curly brace down here. And I'll just write a message saying closing if condition. There we go. Step two, iterate over the data and assign the key to the type and the value to the message variables. So we're going to use the very handy PHP for each loop that PHP provides. So for each with a curly brace. And we'll take this closing curly brace down here and put it on the next row down here. And we'll say closing first for each. So these two lines. So what we're iterating over is we're going to iterate over the flash data that we assigned from the session. So flash data. And because flash data is a hash, we can actually pull the key and pull the value out. So the key will be either success or danger, right? So we can pull those keys out, and then we can pull their data that's actually assigned to them, which would be an array. So I'm going to say as type, because the key is success or danger, I can actually use that in my class definitions to make things a little easier for myself. Fat arrow, $, messages. So that's what that will look like. Some people call that arrow a hash rocket. Doesn't really matter. I call it a fat arrow, and I call the other one a thin arrow. I'm body shaming arrows. Next, we want to echo the opening and closing div tags, because we're actually going to put our message inside of a div. So I'm going to write echo And I'm just going to write my HTML right in here. There's the opening tag, and then down here, I'll write the closing tag. So this tag and this tag. Opening and closing div tags. Now I'm ready to iterate over the messages and display each message individually. So if you look at our structure, right? This is our structure. So currently we have access to this, right? That's our type. And then the messages piece is this array, right? I can't just spit the array out flat. I actually have to iterate and pull each value out and display it individually. So to do that, we obviously need another for each loop. So we'll write another for each loop in here. And this time, we don't need the key separator. We can just do messages, which we're getting from here, and store it in an alias variable called message. So each item in the messages array will be stored in the message variable and then be passed into the block for us to work with. And now in there, I'm just going to go echo. And I mean, why not use string interpolation? We have it available to us. So I'll just put a couple of parentheses here, type $message, and then add a break tag at the end. So that way each message gets put on its own line. And then save that. Now we can test this to see if it works. We have that wonderful create script, right? When we fill out the form, it passes to the create script. So what we'll do is we'll just create a session variable, add a flash value into it, and we'll route it back to another page. Totally easy. Sounds more complex than it is. Anybody still typing this out before I switch pages? No? Okay. Let's go to Control P, user, create.php. We're currently dumping this post. That's totally fine. So why don't we just create, first we'll include the session variable. So we'll include, oops, sorry, that's wrong. That's not what I want. I want this. If session status, because remember, I can't do anything with sessions until I know whether or not they're instantiated. If session status equals session none, then we will start the session. We'll do that everywhere we access a session. Anytime we're about to access a session, if we haven't done this somewhere in the page, we need to make sure we do that. And then I can go ahead and set our session. So we'll do a couple of ones. We'll do session slash, and we'll make it equal to our structure. In here, we'll do success, make it equal to an array, and we'll do danger, and make it equal to an array. And why don't we do a couple more? We'll do info, and we'll do warning. Each one of these titles that I'm using, I'm actually pulling from Bootstrap. Bootstrap has class helpers for alerts, and they're alert-success, alert-danger, alert-info, and alert-warning. There's also primary, secondary, there's a whole bunch of different ones. But they're kind of handy because it adds the coloration for you and stuff like that. Right now, these are just keywords, that's it. So now we can go ahead and add values inside here. So I'm going to put a set of quotes in here and say, yay, we successfully used sessions. Under danger, I'm going to say, OMG, I never even. Under info, I'm going to say, yowzers. And under warning, I'm going to say, uh-oh. 4 messages. If you want to add another message in any of these arrays, just write a comma and then write another message. So if I wanted to write a secondary message after Yowzers, I just go comma, my second message, like so. So once you have all the messages written out and you're all set, now we can actually go ahead to our form. I'm going to go to my form. I'm just going to click on register up there. So I'm here. Fill out my name. Enter my email address. Type in a password. Then I'm going to click submit. It's going to come to this page, and it's going to execute that code that we did in the background, right? But you're not going to see anything yet because we don't have our header on this page, right? Our header is in another page. So now if I want to see it, I'm just going to back out create and hit enter. I'm now on this page, and we should be seeing the actual session. I wonder if it's there and I just can't see it. Hold on. We'll inspect and go look. So there's the nav bar. There's a container. Oh, I know what's wrong. I know why we can't see it. Does anybody else know why we can't see it? Anybody want to take a guess? This thing we created is called a partial, and we forgot to make it a part of anything. It's currently just sitting there and doing nothing. We need to go back to header.php, and we need to include it. So if you scroll all the way to the bottom here, you'll see the main nav, and we'll actually post it underneath the main nav. So I'll do PHP. This is on header.php. Include root dot partials underscore flash.php. There we go. So now our flashes will actually show up. We don't need to go back to the create page because, like I said before, once you create session values, they will stay there. They will be permanently a part of our application until we clear them out. However, once we navigate to a header page, any page that contains the header, those things will show, and then the second we refresh that page, they should disappear because they'll clear out. Anybody still typing that out? Good? Good. Now I'll jump back to this page. I'll hit refresh. They should be there. They might just be hidden. That's weird. Why is it not showing? That's super weird. Oh, unless they cleared. I bet you they cleared. All right, not a big deal. We'll go to register. Fill out my information again. Hit submit because I'm a rebel and not going to put in a password. Now I'll back out create. Hit enter. Oh, not that one. There they are. There's all my messages. But they're not nice and colorful. They're just flat text, right? I showed you this really pretty little colorful thing and made promises I haven't kept, right? Here's all the colors. You're like, but I want to see the colors. How do I get the colors? I'll show you how we get the colors. We go back to the underscore flash.php. You'll notice the one variable we did not use anywhere was our type variable. And the type variable is the most important part because it's going to give us the color. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a bootstrap class style. Whoops. Use single quotes so that it doesn't break it apart. And the class styles in Bootstrap, the way alerts work is the first piece to tell it it's an alert, you just use alert, then a space, and then alert dash, and then the type of alert that you want to use. So if it's success, you'd write success here. If it's danger, you'd write danger here, right? Info, write info. See where I'm going with this? So we're going to write alert. We're going to write alert dash, right? And then using string interpolation, because echo, if you have double quoted strings afterwards, it will actually evaluate the string, right? And we have double quoted string. I'm going to add the parentheses here. I'm going to type $type in there. And that will now create my colors. Because that will be alert, alert dash success, and alert, alert dash danger, and alert, alert dash info, and so on and so forth. And congratulations, you did your first little tiny bit of metaprogramming. That's metaprogramming. All right, anybody still typing that out? Yeah? Are you excited to see the colors prints? Not a chance. Like, nope, sorry, dude. Need more. I only have colors. All right, we ready? You ready? Cool. Let's jump back. We have to, unfortunately, fill out the form because every time we do the page, it clears them out, right? So we got to make sure we add them again. Submit. Back out create. Go to the users page. Hit enter. Oh, look at that. Isn't that gorgeous? All these wonderful things. Now, incidentally, Bootstrap actually gives us a way to make these dismissible as well. It will add a little X to the side, and the user can actually click the X and dismiss the alerts one at a time. We can do that at a later point, but just keep in mind that that's available. So we have flash notifications. We're basically almost there. The only last piece we need to do is make it so that when the user makes a mistake, we can actually take the data that they put in the form, like when they fill out this form, right? We don't want to make them have to fill out all the fields all over again when they make a mistake. We want to make sure that we pass this information back to them, right? And then they can start off where they left off. In order to do that, we're going to need to be able to pass the form data back. So we know that we can use sessions to pass information around. So what we'll do is we'll use sessions to pass the form data back. But I need a break. You guys need a break. So let's take 15. I'll help anybody who needs help up here, and then we'll resume. Start back up again here. So we have our messages. They come to the screen. Yippee, skippy, us. Now we're ready to actually utilize all that. But before we get there, we want to pass our form data. So you've probably had this happen to you. You go to a website, you fill out a form, and it has a ridiculous number of inputs. I will show you, hands down, the most ridiculous form I have ever built for a client. This is the worst. I even argued with the guy. Said, you don't want to do this. People will hate this. He's like, no, 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 I need this. I want to make a lodging request for my pet, right? Complete my application form. So in order to register my pet, and this doesn't register the pet, this is an application to register my pet for his business, and he decides whether or not he wants my pet. Okay? That's the way it works. You have to fill out all of this information, right? Get here, choose which animal it is. I have a dog, his name's Murray. Fill out all of that information. Fill out things like this. There's one that actually generates more. Trying to think of where it is. Is your dog an escape artist? Oh, have you boarded before? Fill out that information. I tell you, when you're creating a form and you're a developer and you have to fill out this form every time you want to do a test, I found a handy Chrome extension that will actually save all your form values for you and then populate them for you. Definitely look that up if it ever happens to you. Anyway, so we do this whole form, right? So you fill out this whole form as a user, and then you submit it, and you made a mistake. You forgot a field. And it routes back, and you get a blank page. What are you likely going to do? Yeah, you're likely going to go find somewhere else to lodge. There's no way you're going to do this, right? So how do we get around that? Well, obviously, the easiest way to get around this is to give the user back their form data and repopulate all these fields with whatever they actually have originally populated it with. And it's really simple, so it makes sense to do it, right? It doesn't take much for us to do it, so we need to do that for them. And this does do that, by the way. It will repopulate. Still, it's absolutely torture. So passing back form data. When a user makes a mistake, we don't want them to have to fill out the entire form all over again just to correct the mistake. So what we do is repopulate the form with the missing data. We do this by passing back the form data, and you can see this doing this in our error handling for the create.php page, which we haven't written yet, so you're not going to see it yet. But in order to do it, it's as simple as creating a new session variable, right? And then we just take the Superglobal post, which contains all of our data anyways, right? Everything we want that the user has submitted from the form is inside that variable. We don't access any of the keys. We just take the whole Superglobal and shove it in there, which means all of that data just gets repopulated right back into the session variable. Then in our header, we do the same thing we're doing with the flash. We assign it back to a variable, and we make sure we unset it. And the reason why we unset it is because if they register a user, right, and then they come back to that form, you don't want to accidentally populate it again with those same details, right? You want to give them a blank, clean form, right? So we make sure we unset it so that it clears it out. Super simple, not very complicated whatsoever. But to make this work, we need to fix our header.php page so it has these two steps in it, this line and that line. So if we jump over to our VS Code, if I can get Mac to settle down, and we're going to go to header, and we'll scroll up to the top. Anybody remember how to duplicate a line? That's right, Alt-Shift and down. I mean, we might as well because it's super easy. All we're going to do is take this. Actually, we're going to be even cheekier than that. We're going to highlight the word flash, hit Control-D once so it copies both of those. So they're both highlighted. And we're going to change this to form, like so. And then we have to modify this one just slightly, underscore data. There we go. Now they both say form data. So we have our form data. It's going to come from our session form data. Otherwise, it will be null. So this will be available on every single page that includes the header, right? Hence the reason why we need to do the next step and unset it. There we go. It's unset. The only problem with using a Mac with Windows on it is I don't have a home key. So I can't like hit home to immediately go to the end of the line or the beginning of the line. Just those two lines. Anybody still typing those out? We're good? Oh, you still are? Okay. So once we've done that, the thing is, though, is we need to be able to take this form data and we need to be able to use it in our form, right? What we want to do is basically grab each of those values and then pre-populate the form. Now, I'm not sure if you guys did this when you learned HTML, but you can actually set a value attribute on an input and give it a predefined default value. Did you guys do that in HTML with your forms? You probably did placeholders. Yeah, value is a little bit different because it's actually a value, and if you submit it, the value will go to the next page. So we can actually do that, take advantage of that value, and set a predefined value inside of it. The coolest thing about this whole arrangement is when we're done, this is our form for edit as well. This will allow us to do edit completely now because we can take advantage of this variable and dump a user's information into it, which means the form will now populate because it's already set up to do that. So not only are we giving the user a good user experience, we're also accomplishing our edit functionality that we need. All right, anybody still typing that out? No? Cool, let's open up the form because that's our next stop. So users, form. So we're going to work under these input fields, right? But before we do that, we need to actually add our form data up here. And the reason we're doing this is we're doing our due diligence. If for some reason we go to include this form somewhere and we forget to include our header, that form data variable won't exist, right? So what we want to do so this does not blow up, we're going to define the form data field at the top, and we're just going to set it to either form data or null, which basically says either assign the value if it exists or just make it null, just to protect ourselves. So we'll do question mark PHP, right? $ form data equals $ form data, question, null. And there we go. We are nicely protected in case for some reason form data is not defined. It's a good idea if you're not 100% sure that your data is going to be there or that the variable will be where you need it to be, to do that because it protects your application. All right, that's cool. Now we're ready to actually add the values, and the cool thing is the values are actually very easy to add. We scroll down. Did you get that? Good. Okay. We scroll down to where it says our first input here. Now you'll see the name field. I'm going to put my cursor just after the name field, and I'm going to type in value equals and a couple of quotes. And then all I need to do is access the variable. So I'll use an inline echo statement. And I'll do $ form data first name, because that's what it's called, or null. Super easy. I'll just shrink this. Hopefully this isn't too small. There. That way you can see it on one line. Hopefully you can still see that okay. If you can't, please move up. Gets tricky when it starts moving over to the next line. All right. Now, if we go to the next one, last name, we're going to do the same thing. Value equals, and we put a set of quotes in. Inline echo statement. $ form underscore data. Last name. Or null. Same thing. Midterms this week. This happens at midterms all the time. Yeah. So we got first name and last name. You're writing that. And that. So this time, why don't we be a little cheeky and we'll copy one of those, right? because the only thing that's going to change is this key. Otherwise, the thing stays the same. So I'm going to take one, I'm going to hit Control-C and copy it entirely. Notice, don't accidentally copy this extra angle bracket, just on the other side of it. I'm going to scroll down to email, put my cursor beside the name equals emails, hit space, Control-V, and change this to email, and save. Now, does it make sense to do password? I agree. Does not make sense to do password. It makes more sense to force them to enter that one every time, just to be sure that they're getting the exact password they want, right? People get freaked out if you start populating values that they're not expecting you to have, right? They don't want to know that you've just taken their password and stored it somewhere. That freaks them out. So don't do that. Make sure it's empty every single time they come back. The reality is that password, you can go look at it. It's not hard. Which means don't trust every place you sign up. We have to have the raw password. How else are we going to hash it? How else are we going to deal with it, right? So we have to have it. So you do have a bit of trust with people, right? And your information. Okay, so now this will make sure that we have the form data back. So why don't we trick it and make sure this actually works, right? So I'm going to go over to create.php. I'm going to create $_session, call it form_data, make it equal to _post, right? So I'm going to store the post in there. And then I'm going to show you how we can actually redirect our user. And what redirect means is take our user from the page they are currently on and send them to a different page, right? Basically create a whole brand new request. And we do that by typing in header. And then we just fill in the header information we want. So location, and then where we want to go. And I want them to go to, well, it's in the same folder, so we'll cheat a little bit. We'll just do .form.php. And then it's super important to do exit after header. The reason is because this is kind of weird. This is a weird thing that PHP does. PHP will actually process this whole page. It will hit the relocate. It will redirect to wherever it needs to go, and then continue to parse this action, which means you'll think that because you've been redirected, that's it. Script's done. We're moved on, right? It's on you. People treat it like a return, almost like you've returned outside of it. The problem is that's not what happens. In the background on the server, this script continues to execute until it's done. When we call it exit, we're doing essentially a hard exit. We're leaving the page. That's done. The script is over. We have moved on. We've done something else. If you don't want to do exit, you don't have to. You can also do die. Die also works. It's an alias for exit. Some people like die better than exit. I don't know why. Morbid. Anyways, let's go back. Let's go to our page. Fill in our information. Okay. I'll even add a password so you can see that the password will not come back. And then once you fill that out, go ahead and hit submit. Oh, couldn't find users. Oh, because it's underscore form, isn't it? Whoops, made a mistake. Underscore form. There we go. Has to be the name of the file, which makes sense. All right, you ready? Let's try this again. It's all filled out, got all the data in here, but that's only because it was there before. If I refresh, all that data disappears, right? So There we go. There we go. Click submit. Should redirect back. Unused constant base path assumed. Oh, right. Oh, I am so sorry. I am not following my own conventions. We don't want to go to form. We want to go to new. Otherwise, we're going directly to the form. The form is included in new. We want to go to new because that contains our header. That contains all of our information. Yeah. Sorry, long day. I like Fridays off. So I work 10-hour days through the week. I work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 10 hours. So I get up at 6 in the morning, get to G shift at 8, work till 6, come here for 7, work till 10, then go home. But I get Fridays off, so it's totally worth it. All right. Okay, so we've got new.php. Now we're on to the right thing. I'm going to refresh. Sean. Let's do a different email, actually. I want to see what other characters show up for me. I like that one. ASDF, and submit. Yay! So we're back, and you'll notice Sean, McKinnon, Demetrius, Alexander at hotmail.com are all still filled out. However, if I refresh this page, all that information should disappear because we've unset the session variable, right, in our header. So all that information should disappear. So I refresh, and I have a nice blank form. Cool. So we've completed 2 utilities that we needed. We have our flash notifier, so we can alert the user if something's gone wrong or if their thing was successful. We have the flash data, which will allow us to actually be able to repopulate the form with their information if they've made a mistake. That way they're not, having to fill out the whole form all over again. So with those 2 utilities, we are finally on week 6, ready to create a user. Yeah. Actually, I think we're week 7. Yeah, we're week 7. So this is going to be a lengthy process. We have a couple of things we just need to cover before we get into it, but this will be a lengthy process, just to warn you. I want to talk about a concept that's super important to understand called validating, sanitizing, and normalizing data. And this is not PHP specific. This is any type of system that you're taking user information from, even video games, right? So I was playing Doom the other night, and when you register to do the snap map thing where you can actually create your own Doom maps, you guys played Doom before? First person shooter, you have to kill the monsters? No? Oh, you need to play Doom. Anyways, you have to fill out your information, right? And this is in a video game. So you fill out your username, you fill out your password, and you hit enter, right? It's still like a website, though. It's still CRUD. It's still creating, reading, updating, deleting that user information. It takes that user information, sends it off to a web server. The web server then writes it to a database. That process is still the same, whether it's a video game or whether it's a web browser, it doesn't matter. Same when you sign up with Netflix on your television. Same process is happening when you sign up to Netflix on the browser. Exactly the same process. Just happens to be inside an application. That's the only difference. But these 3 things happen in every good application. Validating is going through the user's information and making sure that they're giving you good data, right? Not hacky data, not trying to hack my website, not trying to hack my database. Good data, right? Because hackers, they will attempt to access your application because they want to use your application. And you may be like, well, I'm Satchfree. What the heck does a hacker want with my website? Like, they have no reason to use my website, but they do. Because what they will use your website for, they will store information on your hard drive space. They will use your website to create something called a DDoS attack, where they can actually use your website and 6 million other websites to all attack Git, like GitHub at the same time, or attack Netflix at the same time. So they use you as little proxies. Or storing illegal content on your site. That happens all the time too, like child pornography. That's a bad one, but that happens to people with insecure sites. Sometimes it's not even things like that. Sometimes it's really stupid. Sometimes it's like advertising. They load your database full of advertising on the idea that you are going to see that advertising. Because when you go find out why your database is full of crap, you'll see all the crap. And then you'll be like, oh, well, that's actually a good price for a laptop. Maybe I'll go look at that. That's what they're hoping for. So they just blanket bomb the whole thing and fill it full of garbage, right? In fact, actually, I thought it was hilarious. I work for a company that builds search engine optimization tools, right? Min 10. And one thing hackers will do is they will go to your website. They will use a specific referring URL. So when the person goes to your site, it tells you where they came from, right? And Google Analytics would store the referral URL. So what they would do is they would put in their URL / new laptops at Tiger Direct for $7.99. That would become the refer. Then when you would go look at your analytics and see where your traffic's coming from, you would see new laptops for $7.99 at Tiger Direct. Real cheeky, real smart, real cheeky. Anyway, so while you may think that your website's not important enough for a vandal, they will. The hackers will hack anything if they can possibly hack it, especially if it's easy. If it's easy for them to do, like WordPress, they'll definitely hack it. So never trust the user. Never trust anything the user is doing. You may have heard something called client-side validation. Client-side validation, you've likely seen it. You forget to enter your name, you hit submit, it pops you back up to the field and says this field is required. Client-side validation, unfortunately, is not secure, it's not reliable because it's happening in the user's browser, right? And they can actually bypass it quite easily. They can either edit the form and write no validate right inside the browser. Just write no validate and hit submit. That bypasses all the client-side validation and off it goes to the server. Or they can not submit the form from there at all. They open up an application like Postman or curl or something like that. They send a post request using that application directly to your server. They're not even using your form. Doesn't even touch the client-side validation whatsoever. They're just immediately sending the data directly to the endpoint. Because of that, you have to treat client-side validation as being a better user experience. That's really what it's for. It's so that you don't have to do that round trip, right? You fill out the form, you hit submit, you forgot your username, so we come up and say, you forgot your username before we send your information to the server, right? Before we have to go through that whole process. But you still have to validate at the server. You have to make sure that that data is good, right? You want to make sure that data is clear. It's not going to contain cross-site scripts. It's not going to contain SQL injections before you start inserting it into your database. So there's a few different types of validation. And the ones that I've listed here are the most common. There's not empty. So that's when I require certain fields. So our user form will require you to enter your first name, your last name, your email address, your password, and the password confirmation. Those 5 fields have to be filled out. I might have other pieces. I might allow people to upload an image. That might not be required. So obviously I don't care if that one's empty, but I will care about the other 5 being empty. So on my server, I need to check to see if those things actually exist. So I can use the empty function that PHP gives me to check and see if that value is there. If it isn't, then I can perform some sort of error handling, right? Often, you're going to want to be able to do this for multiple fields. And the last thing you're going to want to do is sit there and do, 25 empty checks. It's much easier to just give an array, like I'm doing here, iterate over the array, just make the values inside the array the same as the keys that you would have in your form. That makes it super easy. You iterate over them, pass each one of those into the post, and then check to see whether or not it's empty. We're going to write that one today. Often you're also going to want to check matching. So usually this is for confirmations, right? You don't really see email confirmation very much in forms anymore, but sometimes you do, where you type in your email address and then you confirm it. But you will often see password, confirm password. This is where the matching check comes into play. So when those things come back, we're going to verify that the post password, for example, matches the password confirmation. Otherwise, we're going to echo your password must match confirmation, right? Same if it was email. If you have multiple fields to match, you can use an algorithm like this, which allows you to iterate over it, and then you just store your errors as you go through. We're not going to need that because we're only matching one. We don't need to go that sophisticated. Unique. Unique is a big one. Obviously, usernames need to be unique, right? I can't use the username Sean McKinnon and you use the username Sean McKinnon. Otherwise, how does the system know who's who? How, like, imagine if both of our usernames were the same in Facebook. There would obviously always be collisions. I would get your wall, you would get my wall, right? You'd see my likes, I'd see your likes. Wouldn't really make a lot of sense. So it needs to be unique. So that's another thing we have to check. We need to validate that the user that they're requesting to be is unique. We also need to be kind of discreet about it. We don't want to give the user too much information, and this is a common entry point for hacks. I try 650,000 usernames to see which usernames are sitting in your database. That gives me back a record set of the users that are in your database. And now, using a dictionary, I can go through a whole slew of passwords and try those passwords with those user combinations till I find a match, right? So what you will do often is stop that by recording the number of times that user attempts to log in, and you basically figure out who they are using their IP address. So you store their IP address and attempt 1, attempt 2, attempt 3, attempt 4, attempt 5, done. No more. Blocked, locked out. Blacklist their IP address. So that's usually common. We're not going to go to that extent, but it's something to be aware of. Format is evaluating whether a field matches a particular format. This crazy text you see here is known as regular expression. How many of you are familiar with regular expression or have used regular expression? I recommend learning regular expression. It is available in every programming language. There's no exception. Every single programming language has a way to evaluate regular expression. What regular expression allows you to do is it allows you to take a string and evaluate that string for a pattern. You can actually look through the string and find specific things. So for example, say I have a phone number, right? So here's my phone number. Right? There's my phone number. It's not actually. So, and I want to be able to just pull the numbers out. That's it. I don't want these brackets. I don't want this dash. I just want those particular numbers. I can write a regular expression that says start at the beginning of the sentence, look for one digit, capture that digit, find the first bracket, and I have to escape it. Look for 3 digits. Capture those 3 digits. Find the next closing slash. Look for 3 digits. Capture those 3 digits. Find the dash. Look for 4 digits. And capture those digits. What we'll return back is 1, 2, 3, 4 capture groups containing just the numbers. I can then grab all of those numbers, and what I'll be left with is just the numbers. And then I can store that as nice sanitized data. And I don't have to worry about all of the extra stuff. The problem is this is not enough, because people don't necessarily do just that. They also do things like this, right? They do crazy things like add double dashes, right? Or they might not include these. Or they might just write it as a raw number. There's too many possible options. But regular expression has no limit to the length. We have a bit of regular expression in our system that is literally, I think it's 700 characters long. So it's like a string of 700 characters. And what it's matching for is IPv6 IP addresses, because IPv6 uses letters and numbers. So the whole thing actually matches for a proper IPv6 number. Thing's ridiculous. Regular expression, super handy. This regular expression I'm looking here, we've got 4 of them. The first one's going to check to see if the password contains a capital letter. That's the first one. The second one's going to look to see if it contains at least one number. The third one checks to make sure it contains at least one of these symbols. And then the last one checks to make sure that it's at least 8 characters long, which you've seen commonly in many password generators or any password that asks you for a robust password. We're going to allow simple passwords for now, but that is there if you ever want it. You can actually literally just copy those out. So that's validators. There's also built-in PHP validators. Has a whole bunch of them, and they all work with filter var. Filter var is a function that you just basically pass it the data, and then you pass it the validator you want to check with. So the first one, for example, checks to see if it's a Boolean, or you can check to see if it's an integer, or you can check to see if it's a float. That's validating actual data types. It doesn't matter if the data is a string. It'll evaluate the actual value inside the string. The next two are kind of interesting. This one validates that it's an actual email address. So it has to contain the @ symbol. It has to contain a domain. Those are two of the major requirements for that. And then the next one validates if it's a URL, which this would not validate correctly because it has to have a schema. The schema is the HTTP or the HTTPS. It would have to contain that at the beginning for it to be valid. That's a copy and post error. Copy and paste, I mean. The built-in validators, super handy, and we're going to use them today. Sanitizing is a little different. Sanitizing is crucial to the integrity of our application. So validation validates that we have what we're expecting to have. It validates the data, and we have, first name, last name, the passwords match, the email is in the correct format. That's what our validations do. Sanitization takes all of that information and it strips the garbage out of it. So if somebody is trying to insert SQL statements, it'll strip those out. If somebody tries to insert a bunch of JavaScript into it in hopes that we'll write JavaScript to our system, it strips those out. All the tags get automatically stripped out because they can actually use that to create things like a cross-site scripting attack. What that is it's where in your field, for example, in here, under first name, if I was to write I can now pull all the cookies from your system. So what I can do is I can take that, insert it in, and then add it as a comment on your website. So now people are navigating to that website and they're viewing the comments. That script tag won't show up because tags don't show up. HTML tags don't show up, right? So it's running in the background. And in addition to document.cookies, I do an AJAX request where I take all those cookies that are on your system and now fire them off to my own server. And I record them and I store them in my server. That happens like a lot. That's called a cross-site scripting attack, where I use JavaScript, I dump it in a field that's in an unprotected system, and I now start scraping people's information. That's cross-site scripting. So obviously we need to protect against that, and the way we do that is by using sanitization methods. And the cool thing is that PHP already gives us the ability to do that quite easily. Filter sanitize email will actually go through the email address and it will strip out any pieces in there that should not be in there. You have to be careful with that one though, because it can modify valid email addresses. It's been known to do that. Filter sanitize string basically goes through any string, any quoted string you give it, and it will remove any tag-like things. It will also remove sneaky people who try to use HTML percent characters, which is like %20 for space, %5C for the angle bracket, because people will do that in order to hopefully get it in there, right? It goes through and removes all that, strips all that out. And then the last one, Sanitize Integer, that's a neat one. Doesn't matter what you write here, this returns a number. If this is not a number and it's like Sean, it'll return 0. So it's automatically 0. So no matter what, that will always give you back a number, which is great. The thing it won't do is throw back errors. It always returns back something, even if it's an empty string. It'll just return back something. So validation validates all of our stuff and makes sure that we have the data that we're expecting. Sanitization makes sure the data integrity is there, the quality of the data is there. It removes any possible hackery, but it also helps keep our data in not integral, quality. Just keeps our data quality. Normalizing is a little different. Normalization is the process of ensuring data quality. For example, if we want to make sure that all users are putting their names in our forms in with like an uppercase letter and then lowercase letters, right? Which I know to you probably seems like, why would you do it any other way? Like when I type in Sean, I want it written like that. However, my Uncle Henry, who's 73, writes like this in everything he does. It's all capitals. Like, I swear to God, he doesn't know how to turn off the caps lock, right? Doesn't even know where it is. Doesn't need to. Writes everything in capitals. Well, if I'm putting this stuff into my system, I don't want it in there like that. I want to maintain data integrity and quality. So what I'll do is I can actually lowercase those letters and then just make the first letter capital. That can lead to a problem as well. My last name is spelled with 2 capitals. The K is capital and the M is capital. That's because it's Scottish and it means son of Kinnan is what it means. But so the format is with a capital M and a capital K. When I normalize, what I'm likely going to do is lowercase all of these letters and then only uppercase the first letter, which does that and changes the format of the last name. Not a big deal to me. I don't really care. I've seen that happen. Amazon does that to me. Other companies do that to me. They're not doing any special magic to make sure it looks right. They don't care. But people do take offense to things like that when you start modifying their name, right? So you got to be cautious about that type of stuff. You also need to be careful about last names like that are separated, like that St. Catherine, right? Saint Germain, names like that. Any name that's split, you have to be careful about that as well. Though PHP does support the ability to work with things like that. You can still lowercase it and then just make it so that the first letter of each word becomes uppercase. That's also workable. So that's normalization. Normalization basically ensures data quality. That's the whole idea of it. Most times it's not so much about the user data coming in that you're normalizing. Usually it's things you want to normalize, like if you're allowing the user to enter categories and create their own categories, chances are you're going to want to make sure those categories are always in the same format. If they're doing tags, like they're adding tags into like for colors or any type of attribute, you usually want to make sure they're formatted the same way at all times, just stuff like that. Anything that the user can kind of manipulate, you tend to want to normalize, right? But it's usually application-based stuff. Oh, and also I wrote down here, Amazon actually normalizes your address. So when you enter your address information in, the first thing it does is come back and say, I found these 6 addresses. Do any of these addresses match your address? And you hit yes, and you've now just confirmed that normalization, right? And it tries to do it through like Google Maps API and tries to pull back a correct address. Cool. We are finally ready to create the user. Yeah. Let's go for it. Open up that create script, create.php. And all this stuff we wrote, totally up to you. Either duplicate this page and keep track of that if you want to, but all the stuff we just did is going to have examples in this page, so you can clear it out. Basically, I'm going to remove all of that stuff that's sitting underneath step 3 and just delete it so that I only have step 3 left. So step 1 for us is going to be to include our config file and our connect file, which we've already done. And we need to make sure we do that other step where we actually do con equals connect. So there we go. We have our connection. And we've stored it in a variable. I need my session so that I can store all of my messages in the flash, right? Might as well do that now so I have it. So at the top of my page, I'm going to do if session status, and that's a function, equals, 3 equals, PHP session none. Then let's start our session. We'll just work right through because then we can just leave early. Sound like a deal? Next, we just want to preset our session flash to make sure it's ready to go. And looking back at this, I kind of think we should have did this in the header because we're going to do this every time anyways. It feels kind of ridiculous to be doing it in every script, but we'll do it here. It just makes sense for now. We might move this stuff and clean it up at a later point. There we go. So there's flash, and I'm going to make it equal to an empty array slash hash. Technically a hash because we're going to do hash stuff in it. Cool. So we're all set for our messaging system. We have our connection, we started our session, and we've created a session variable. Cool. Let's scroll down a little bit. Down here, I'm going to create an empty array to store our errors. Like so. And then when we have errors, we'll just add them to our flash system, just so that we can kind of keep track of the word errors and make it a little bit more syntactically correct. Semantically, I should say. Next, we're going to verify that our fields aren't empty. So we're going to start our validation steps, right? So we have the fields from the user that came back as post. The fields, we already know their names because they'll be the same names that we defined in the form under the name attribute. So first underscore name, last underscore name, email, password, and password underscore confirmation. Those are our field names. If we forget, we just go back to the form and go look at the name attribute to remember what they are, right? Also, I always do this. I intentionally make the name attribute the same as the column name in the database. I always do it that way because it makes things a lot easier and it allows me to be able to do a little bit more dynamic stuff if those names are exactly the same, right? So however I've named the columns is exactly how I name my fields in the form. All right, so the first thing we're going to do, we're going to define a variable with, I'm not talking to you, sorry, stop. Oh, thank you. Perfect. All right, so we're going to define a variable with an array value. And in here, we're going to put in our field names. So first name, last name, email, password, and password confirmation. We could write individual empty checks on this if we wanted to, but it just makes more sense to do it this way. We could clean all of this up too using functions, but I think we'll just keep it nice and simple. Next, I'm going to iterate through each one of those fields and check to see if they're empty. So I'm going to do for each $required, which I'm pulling right here from this array, as $field, like so. So it's going to go through. The first time it iterates, it's going to take first name. It's going to assign that to field and then pass that into the block. And now we have field available to us and we can check it. So the first thing we want to do is check the post key, which will be the same as that key there, to see if it's empty or even doesn't exist. Maybe it doesn't even exist. So we'll do if $_post. And instead of writing a hard-coded key in here, we can instead just pass it $field, which the first time will be this key on the first iteration. So just $_post and then field, right? And then we're going to wrap that in a function call called empty. And I'll show you something neat. If you highlight this and then press shift and your bracket, it will immediately wrap it in the bracket for you. So now I like to make sure my error messages look nice and clean. And the one thing I don't like is these underscores. I don't want to respond back to the user and say, you forgot to put first underscore name, because that doesn't mean anything to them. They won't understand what that means. So instead, what I like to do is make sure that I give them back a human readable, that's what I call it, human readable message, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to format that field name. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to do UC first, which means uppercase the first letter. And then in that, we're going to do string replace, which you might remember from a while ago. I'm going to tell it to look for the underscore character. I'm going to tell it to replace it with a space. And it's going to find that in the $_post $field. Kind of a mouthful for a line. Oh, sorry, no, don't, I did that wrong. Don't need that part, you just need the field. That's it. So what that will do is it will take the underscore out of here and replace it with a space, and then it will uppercase the first letter. Now I'm ready to add a new message. So there's a few ways you can add, like push a value onto an array. You can use the function array push, but I find it much cleaner just to use the shorthand syntax, which is $errors, the name of the array, an empty pair of brackets, and an equal sign, which is the shorthand version for push, and then your message. So I'm going to write my message as $formatted. So I get that out. I'm using string interpolation. Remember, double quotes for string interpolation. Cannot be empty, period. Oh, just to recap, we created an array and we stored all of the keys that we're getting from our form, right? Because they're going to be the same keys that'll be under the post superglobal. Then I iterate through that array and assign each one off to the field, and I check to see if it's empty. If it's empty, I format it into a human readable string, and I assign a new error telling them that that field cannot be empty, right? And it will do that for all 5 of those lightning quick. So next, that's one verification. I also want to verify that the email is in the correct format. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit to our step 3, and I'm going to write if exclamation mark, which means whatever this thing is, this condition that I'm checking, make it opposite, right? So if it's supposed to be false, now it needs to be true, that kind of thing, right? So if filter var, and then I'm going to give it underscore post email, and I'm going to give it what I want it to check, and it's going to validate the email. So what that basically says is this part here before the exclamation mark will say, is this a valid email? And this will return back true if it is, or return back false if it isn't, but we're reversing it, right? So what this actually says, is this not a valid email? So we're checking to see if it is not a valid email. That's what the exclamation mark is doing for us. And if it isn't, we're going to write this all on one line. Errors, square brackets, equals your email is not in a valid format. Just a note, we as developers need to be careful of our spelling and our grammar and stuff like that, because often these little messages, these success messages and error messages, we'll be writing. Usually those are the ones that we write. It's very rare that you'll have a business manager that will want those exposed for them to write. Most times it will be you writing this. So make sure you check your spelling, check your grammar so that it looks good and you're not, sending out something with spelling errors out to a user. All right, next, we're going to validate that the password and password confirmation match. So if, this is simple, just a simple conditional check. If $_post password does not equal $_post password confirmation, then add a new error. Errors equals your password must match the password confirmation. Now, I like to do things in certain steps. If there's an issue with their email, if there's an issue with their password, or if any of that information is missing, there is no point in me continuing with my script. Because as far as I'm concerned, you're missing some sort of essential piece of data. And if you're missing that essential piece of data, I can't create a new user. So at this point, this is a good point to be like, there's errors, let's send those errors back to the user and tell them there was a problem, right? So this is going to be our first step to actually send our errors back to the user and let them know that they got problems. They need to fix some problems. So I'm going to do an if condition. And my condition is literally going to be to check to see if there was any errors. And the easiest way to do that would be just count the errors array and see if it's greater than 0. Because if there's errors and they're in the errors array, even 1 will mean that I have more than enough information to tell me that I need to alert the user that they need to fix the problem. So my first step is add those errors to the session. So flash, and we'll add them to danger. And I'm going to make it equal to the errors array. So we're just going to shove that array right directly in there, because you'll remember our flash requires an array. If I only wanted to add one message here, I could just write square brackets and write the message and send it back. That would be fine too. But we already have this errors array that we've been keeping track of, so we'll give it. Next, I want to make sure they have the form data, because I don't want them to have to go and fill all that out again. So I'll do form data is equal to $_post. And I only want to do this if there's an error. I don't want to do this no matter what, right? Only if there's been an error do I want to assign it. We could assign this at the top of the page, but it doesn't make sense. If they wind up going back to the form for some reason, their form data is going to be there and they're going to be weirded out. So we only want to do it if there's an error. Got to think like a user. Always think like a user and what you would find strange and try to avoid those things. Now we can relocate once I've had my stroke. And we're going to go to location. And then we just give it the information we want. So why am I using concatenation? All right, whatever. We're using concatenation here. Base path, which is coming from up above where we included our config. Users new.php. So a nice absolute URL. And remember what I said before? If I redirect, what must I do after the redirect? Exit, right. Especially in this scenario, because the code below this is creating the new user. If we don't exit, we're going to create the new user, even though we told them we couldn't create them. Yeah. So we got to make sure we exit. So if we have any errors, we're going to relocate. Otherwise, we'll continue on with our script. And of course, we're going to go take a look at this and see if it works. All right, we're good? Anybody still typing? Okay, I'll give you a second. I'll erase this phone number off the board so I don't weird out the next person that teaches. There. All right, we good? Thumbs up. Awesome. Jump back to your browser. Refresh this page. Go ahead and fill it out. Actually, you know what? Don't fill it out. Let's see if our validation works, right? Because in theory, if I hit submit, I should get back your first name is missing, your last name is missing, and you have an email issue. Incidentally, funny enough, our password matching issue will not be an issue because those passwords technically match. They're both empty, right? If we really want to throw it for a loop, type something in one. Don't type anything in the other, and then we'll definitely get that error back. So go ahead and hit submit. Redirects back. Get a nice big flash message. First name cannot be empty. Last name cannot be empty. Email cannot be empty. Your password confirmation cannot be empty. Your email is not in a valid format. Well, obviously, there's nothing there. And then your password must match the password confirmation. So we get every error back, right? Let's see if we can make it valid. So we'll go ahead and fill out our form. There we go. I made sure it was all correct data. And now if I hit submit, it should just land on a blank page. And we should see nothing. Right? We shouldn't get any errors back. We should just have a blank page. Which is good, because that means it's at our create page, and it's sitting, it's actually stalled right here on line 44. It's just sitting there, waiting to know what we needed to do next. Has no idea. All right. Our next steps. Now we're going to do our sanitization. So come down here to where it says step 6, line 55. And we're going to sanitize the emails first. So we're just going to make sure that even if the email is in the valid format, We want to strip out any characters that shouldn't be in there, and we want to convert any characters they might have tried to use, like %20, into the actual character, okay? So let's do that now. We're just going to overwrite the email that is currently in post. We're not going to assign it to a new variable. Filter var $_post email, and then we pass it the filter sanitize email. And what that will do is return back a sanitized email and store it into the post. And the reason why I'm just restoring it into post is because if any other errors happen, I'm going to send those guys back a sanitized version of their email. So that way, if they're a little hacky hacker, they're going to see that I'm stripping out all their hard work. Next, we need to sanitize 2 more fields. We want to basically make sure the strings are strings, right? So on step 7, we're going to write a for each loop. We're going to do for each. And instead of creating an array above, because it's only 2 fields, we'll do an inline array this time, which will be kind of neat because you can actually see how this structure works. So I literally just type the square brackets right in here, and I do first name and last name. So there's the values. And then I write as $field, right? So this will work the same way as if I passed a variable containing an array. There's no difference. And then I can say $_post $field equals filter var $_post $field comma filter sanitize string. Now, what's interesting in programming, and this qualifies for many programming languages, is when we have a block. That's what these curly braces are. They're the block, right? And they encapsulate our code for us. When we have a block and we only have one line of logic, most languages will actually permit us to remove the block entirely because you don't need it, because you only have one line of logic. It's the only thing that's executing. Because it's the only thing that's executing, we can literally get rid of both these curly braces, and you can either leave this guy on this line, or you can pull him up so he's in line with the for each statement, and it's all treated as one line. Now, you've seen me do that with the if conditions, but you can also do it with a for each statement. So I'm going to get rid of this closing curly brace.
Rain and berry around 9:23 p.m. with temperatures around 90 degrees.
Didn't even ask. Thanks for your contribution. Go away. How do I make you go away? Ah, just stop. There. All right. So I pulled this up so it's all one line. Now, obviously, when it's zoomed in like this, it's a little tricky to see. But when I'm coding myself, it's all in one line, right? Makes more sense. So keep that in mind. Also, try these tricks. This is an interesting thing, to try tricks like this when you're in Java and you're coding out in Java and you learn these little weird tricks. Try them, because a lot of them will work. Like inline if conditions will work, ternary statements will work. Incidentally, you know that thing I like to do where I write things like and then what other value I want to use? That does exist in Java, but you would write it this way. The or, logic or, no. Same thing. That's like that in almost every other language except for stupid PHP. What this will do is it will return this if it contains a value. Otherwise, it will return the other side, right? PHP, if you write the same statement, it'll return either true or false. It returns a Boolean, which is stupid. Instead, they created a brand new operator to make it work, which is really ridiculous. But whatever. Okay, so we have all that. What am I missing here? Oh, cool. We're on to our next step, the bigger of the two steps. So we're sanitizing everything. Everything's all nicely sanitized. Now we're in here and we're going to check to see if the user is unique, right? So we want to make sure that we don't add a user that already exists. We want to make sure they're unique. So this is no different than any other SQL stuff we've written before. It has those same steps that we've done before with users and everything else. In fact, it's exactly the same code as the show where we actually go and grab a user based on a condition. So we're going to write $SQL, and I'm curious, let's break out our logic brains here. What would my SQL statement be? I want to find a user, right? I want to look for a user that may potentially exist. So I'm going to need something from my post, right? What am I looking for? First of all, how do I get a user? What's the basic SQL statement to just get all the users? Yep, select star from users, right? Or in your case, database users, because you're a weird computer. Okay, so yeah, now I want to narrow that down. I've got all the users. I now want to narrow down to the user this user is trying to become. Do I have the ID? No, I don't have the ID. So how do I narrow it down and look for a user that might be the user they're trying to access? First of all, what are we using for a unique username? Are we using username? No. What are we using that's unique? Email. So select star from users where, yep, email equals email. Yeah, exactly. So that's what we're going to write here. We're going to do select star, not 8, star from wow users where email equals, and we don't type raw data into our SQL statements. We use, what do we use? Starts with a B. Something, B, something, parameters. Bound parameters, which we define with the colon, email. This, I think, confuses people. All that is a placeholder. It's a placeholder waiting a value. That's it. It's just waiting a value. And the reason why we use it is because we don't want to take data from the user and inject it into our SQL statement, because that's how we wind up with SQL injection issues, right? Because then they can just type in dump database or whatever. All right, so the next piece, we want to create the statement now. STMT equals $con, that's our connection, prepare $SQL. And what prepare is going to do is it locks this select statement in and says, this is the MySQL code. It assigns this as a bound parameter, and it says, this can only be a literal value. It cannot be MySQL code. It cannot be a command. It can only be a literal value. The valid literal values that I will accept is an array, a string, a integer, a float, anything like that, a date. I'll accept a date, but I will not accept anything that is not a literal value. Super important. So next, we need to bind the value. Otherwise, it will blow up and say, hey, you told me you were going to give me a value, and then you didn't. So bind param colon email. Make sure you don't put a space before this colon. Otherwise, it gets treated weirdly, and it gives you a weird error talking about integers for some bizarre reason. We pass it the $undersign or underscore post email. And then comma, PDO colon, param underscore string. Cool. After that, we execute the statement, execute, and then we store the value in exists. Exists, $stmt, fetch. Now, this is a good one that if you can think it through, this is a good one to turn into a function because you're going to be constantly checking to see if things exist, right? And because of that, it makes a very good function. Anytime you're going to repeat logic like this, especially when it's several lines of logic, it's a good idea to turn that thing into a function. So you would have to look at it and see what things are going to be common in it, and then turn that into the function. All right, so select star from users where email equals email. We prepare our statement. We bind our email parameter, ensuring that it's going to be a string literal. We execute it, and then we fetch the record. We don't care what it returns back. That's irrelevant. The only thing we're caring about is if it returns something back. The way fetch works is if it can't find it, it returns back false. So we can use that to our advantage. Step 9. If $exists, so if the user already exists, then we're right back to errors again, and we're going to add a brand new error. This user already exists. Right, you can say this email is taken, or this username is taken, or whatever it is you choose to. Remember that error thing we wrote further up? We're going to go grab that whole if condition, copy it, and paste it down here because we need it. So scroll up to where we wrote that, up here, and copy it. So Control C or right click and copy the whole thing. Another one that would make a very good function. Scroll down to step 10 and paste it and save. Let's see if this actually works. If we jump over to our browser, go back to users and go find a user email address and copy it. And then click register and make sure you put that in the field. I'm going to add in my first and last name. I'm going to make sure I fill out these. All the other fields need to be filled out correctly. Okay? Otherwise, it will bounce back. I'm putting that user in there, and I'm going to hit submit. And it routes back and says, this user already exists. Right? Now, if we wanted to add a little bit better of a user experience, we could actually clear this so that the email is no longer there because we already know it exists. But it's likely the user is just going to add things to it, like they're going to add the birth date to it or something like that, just to make it a little bit more unique. All right. Boy. We have quite a bit to write here. I think we'll actually delay this for just the beginning of the next class, which isn't for a week because you guys have reading week. So don't forget that you have reading week next week. Don't show up. Yeah, so we'll finish this in the next class because we're going to do edit and update anyway, and destroy, and all that kind of works in the same vein. So we'll just do that all in the same class. We'll call it a night. I'll help you if you have any issues with your code. I can give you a hand, and that way we're not too far ahead because I have a funny feeling most of the people that left is due to needing to study and stuff like that. So I don't want to get too far ahead of them. All right, so let's call it a night. Late night, and I know